Hello everyone, quick video time. Today I want to talk about archaeological site maps, what they're for, what elements they're made up of, and how to make them yourself. Now, a quick disclaimer. Archaeological site maps can look vastly different from one another depending on the standards of recording of where the site is located, as well as personal styles of the map makers themselves. What I'm showing you today is a very basic site location map example based on the guidelines given for archaeological site mapping by the British Columbia Archaeology Branch. Anyways, let's get started. Archaeological site maps, at least nowadays, are generally made using computer-based mapping software known as GIS, which stands for Geographic Information System. For my demonstration, I'll be using a GIS software called QGIS. It's free and open source, so feel free to download it and follow along with me. To make a comprehensive guide on every feature of QGIS would literally take years, so I'm only going to explain the stuff that I'm currently doing when I'm making the map. If you're interested in learning more about how to use the software, I'll link a playlist of videos in the top corner now that will help you explore the program and all it has to offer. Let's set the scene. You were just out on a dig at a newly recorded archaeological site, and you're responsible for drawing up the map. What do you do? While you were out in the field, you, or someone else, would have been responsible for collecting spatial data that is made up of GPS points that represent all the different things you recorded. These might include shovel test locations, evaluative test locations, observed cultural material, site photos, a site datum, survey tracks, and more. Each of these different pieces of information need to be styled so we know what they are. This is something that you would have noted while recording them, so all we have to do is style them in QGIS so that it's obvious what each one is and we can tell them apart. For instructions on how to style shapefile layers, refer to the much more detailed and better tutorials in the playlist that I linked above. For the sake of this video, I've styled every map element discussed here in accordance with the symbology laid out in the BC Archaeology site form mapping standards, which I'll put on screen now so that you can pause to look at. Now let's open QGIS. So let's say that at a new site, you did some shovel tests indicated by these positive and negative squares, an evaluative unit down here, observed and collected some surface artifacts indicated by these white and gray, or rather black and gray stars, and also recorded a site datum right here next to the evaluative unit. Another important aspect is making sure all your spatial data is labeled. So you can see for the site datum, we already have that, which is something that you would have done in the field. And then also something that you can do that you would have recorded in the field as well is make sure all those labels are turned on for your shovel tests so that they can be differentiated from each other. So you can click on whatever layer you want to turn your labels on. Go over to the side layer styling bar here, click on single labels, and then make sure the value is set to the ID or whatever you called the layer that you use to identify each unit. We can just bump the font size down a bit and make it white so it's easier to see. And now you can see that each of our shovel tests has a number so that we can differentiate each one whenever we need to. We can do the same thing for the surface artifacts. Same thing here, single labels. Make sure the value here is set to the ID. And we can also lower the font size and make it white to make those easier to see as well. So now you can see each of these little surface artifacts here now has a little label next to it that shows its ID so that we can tell which one is which. You can also manually change these later on when you're making the map as well. It doesn't have to be at this stage, although it is easier both for making the map and also just analyzing data. Once you have all your spatial data imported and styled, we can move on to the next step. It's important to note that site boundaries do not always reflect the actual shape or size of an archaeological site. They're instead based on just the observed extent of cultural material at the site. So, for instance, this archaeological site that we've recorded here might extend much further out beyond in these areas, but since we didn't test in those areas, we don't know for sure, so we can only draw a boundary around the stuff that we have found. Because more archaeological materials might be located around the site, but we just haven't observed them, the site boundaries can change over time, as they often do. Now, site boundaries can be determined in a couple different ways. The most basic way, in the example I'm going to show you here for this fictional site, is just to buffer the horizontal extent of all the observed cultural material that we have. And that's just kind of a complicated way of saying we will just draw a big circle that extends slightly out around all of the different cultural material that we have found. Other ways, such as being defined by the landform on which the site is located. For instance, if the site is spread out across the edge of a cliff, the boundary might be defined by the cliff's edge as opposed to being buffered out over the edge of the cliff. This isn't as common, at least for the type of site that I'm showing you how to make a map for, but it's also an option. So the way that we're going to create a site boundary is like this. We're going to go to the layer tab up on the menu toolbar, and we're going to create layer. Now, what we're going to do for this first step, there's lots of different ways you can do it. This isn't the only way, but the way that I like to do it is make a new temporary scratch layer, which is essentially just a layer that will only exist while you're opening the program. It won't be saved permanently anywhere, but that's fine because we only need this layer really for what we're doing first. Now, you can also make this a shapefile layer, which the difference being that this temporary scratch layer will also be a shapefile. But if you want to save our rough draft for the site boundary, you can do this one, but instead I'm just going to do the new temporary scratch layer. Layer name doesn't matter, but we are going to change the geometry type to polygon because we're going to be drawing a polygon for our site boundary. And we're going to make sure that we have changed the coordinate reference system to whatever area that we're in. So we're in UTM zone 10N. This might vary depending on where you are in the world. Not might, it definitely will vary depending on where you are in the world. But for the purpose of this map, we're going to choose UTM zone 10N. And you can learn a lot more about coordinate reference systems in other videos. Maybe I'll make one, but for now, we're just going to set it as this. After that, that's really all we need for this temporary scratch layer. So we're just going to hit OK. And you can see on our little sidebar here, our layer tab, there's this new scratch layer. So in order to draw our site boundary, we're going to go up to the top bar here, and this will be automatically done when you create the layer, but if not, you're going to make sure that this yellow pencil icon is clicked because that just allows us to edit this layer. And then we're going to click this button here, which is the add polygon feature. So what we're going to do essentially is just connect each of our little points, which means any observed surface artifact or positive test, we're going to make one of the vertices in our polygon. So you can just manually click on these and connect them together, kind of like connect the dots. And we're going to go all the way around and click on every one of the most exterior points. Now, we don't have to click on every single point. For instance, these positive tests in here, 54 and 7, as well as this surface artifact number 3, they will have other positive tests outside of them, like to the east and west. So you can see here that they already get encapsulated by these ones, so we don't need to go click on every single one of these points. So we're just going to click on the most exterior ones to kind of graph in the total extent. Go down here, and I will pick back up when I have selected all of these. All right, so you can see here now that we've connected all of the most exterior points of our site boundary, of our preliminary site boundary. And so right after we've connected everything, and once you've connected them all, you hit right click to finish the polygon. Then you're going to go up to this top bar right next to the edit button from before and click the save button, which just saves your changes in the layer. And then you can just go ahead, you don't have to, but you can go ahead and click the stop editing button just to make sure you don't accidentally change something. So we've got this polygon now. I'll make it a bit transparent here so you can see underneath it a bit better what's going on. But you can see that we've connected each of the vertices of our polygon to each of the positive tests and surface artifacts that we observed at the site. Now, something you might notice after you've created is like, oh shoot, I should have made the site boundary connect into this surface artifact here. It doesn't, at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter because the site boundary doesn't really mean anything outside of this is just what we observed at this time. It doesn't necessarily have to be on every artifact, but just for the sake of consistency, if you do want to change it, you can go back and make sure that you have the layer selected on the bar here, click the edit arrow, and remember we clicked this button before to draw the polygon, but we can use this vertex tool right next to it to edit the polygon. So if you click on that, you'll see that we have a different tool that highlights the polygon when we hover over it. And if you go to the space, so you can see one of the vertices indicated by these little circles right here, and we have this next vertice down here connected to this one. And in between, you'll be able to see that there's a little X that appears. And so what you can do is you can click on that X, which allows you to add another vertex to the polygon. And I can just click that over so it gets added on top of the surface artifact right here. Now, the same thing might want to be done up here. Let's say if you wanted to be really accurate, you can go in and click these and do the same thing and make sure that they're on top of every single one. Now, I'm not really going to bother with that because it doesn't have to be exact, but you might want to have it all be super consistent for your purposes. Same thing if you decide that you just want to have a straight polygon edge here because it's all going to be connected anyways. You can click on one of the vertices either to move it, or if you click on it and press the delete key on your keyboard, it will just get rid of it. So this is going to be what we move forward with for our site boundary polygon. So this site boundary polygon is good, but we can make it look a bit nicer by buffering it by a certain amount of meters. And this, of course, the main reason for this is not to make it look nicer. The main reason for this would be if anyone is planning on doing a development or just wants to get a good idea of where an archaeological site is, we add a standardized buffer around everything that we've recorded here just to let people know, hey, this is kind of the safety buffer zone around the site that we're still counting as the site. Every single one of these points gets a 5-meter buffer in the British Columbia archaeological standards. So that's what we'll do. You might want to have it different depending on where you are. There might be a lot of reasons why you might extend the site further. For instance, like I said before, if you're connecting it to a landform, maybe you're just snapping the boundary to the landform as opposed to observed cultural material. So for the purpose of this, which is the simplest way, we're just going to add a standardized buffer around the edge of this polygon. So to do that, we're going to make sure we have the layer selected in our layer toolbar here. We are going to go up to Vector and Geoprocessing Tools, and you're going to see this button that says Buffer. And so basically what this is just going to add a pillow around the entirety of the polygon that we've got here. So if we click this, it's going to open up this little menu. There's not really anything you have to worry about in here other than the distance. So this is how far you want to buffer your polygon. So like I said, we're going to be buffering the entire thing by 5 meters, which means we're adding a secondary polygon buffed out around 5 meters around our first polygon. So if we have that selected to 5 or whatever number you want it to be selected to, you can hit run. And now you can see, if we make this transparent, that it has just added a buffer around our previous site. And so this will act as our finalized site boundary, at least for now, until more information is collected about the site. So what we want to do is make sure we save this site boundary, because this is our real site boundary. This one was just used so that we could get our buffer. So you can either hide it or you can just delete it. This is why we didn't make it a permanent layer. It's why we made it only a temporary scratch layer, although you can make it a permanent layer if you want to. But what's more important is that we save this buffered layer, this output layer that we got. So you can either click this button right here. When you buffer something, it'll automatically make it a temporary layer, which means if you don't save it, it will disappear. So in order to save it, make sure we have it permanently. You can either right click on it and go to make permanent, the save button right here, or you can just click on this little button right here, which will open up a menu to let you save it. So we're just going to call this site boundary, and you're going to click on here to make sure that it gets saved to the proper location. So here you can see that we have navigated to the folder in which our GIS program is located, and we're just going to call this site boundary and hit save, and then hit OK. So now this site boundary here has been saved permanently to our project folder, and we're just going to rename it as site boundary. Now, there's a specific style that site boundaries have to be in. You can't just have it as a black line. And so what we have here is I have all these styles saved previously to my device, which is just a red dotted line, which is how we indicate site boundaries. So you can see it a bit better here if I get rid of the background map. It's just a red dashed line, which you can learn how to make styles in a different video. For the purpose of this one, we'll assume that you either know how to do that already, and if I get enough comments saying that they really want to learn how to style layers, I guess I can make a video about that. But this is more about making the map. So this is what we've got for now. Once we've completed that site boundary, we can now move on to actually producing the site map. Like I said previously, there are a lot of different factors about archaeological site mapping that you might change depending on your own personal style. What I'm going to show you here is just one way how to do it. It's a pretty basic way, and so long as you include all of the elements that are on the symbology guide that I showed you earlier and that I'm including here, you can lay it out however you want. So in order to start making our actual map, we're going to go up to Project in the top menu toolbar here. And we're going to go to Project, and you're going to scroll down to see where it says New Print Layout. And a print layout is basically just where you build your map sheet. So we're going to click that. We're going to call this Site Map and hit Enter, and it's going to open up this canvas where we're going to actually build our map. Now, you can see that it opens this in a separate window. We have our main map window back here, and then we have our previous site window right here. So we can switch back and forth between them by going down here. So if our map, or rather if our archaeological site was oriented in an east to west direction, meaning that the long axis was along this way as opposed to north to south, then we would generally keep our map oriented in a landscape way. But since our site, as you can see here, is longer in the north-south orientation, we're going to change our map to portrait, which just allows us to have a better view of the site. It can be more zoomed in, and we can see more important details about the site and less extraneous information about the surrounding area. You can change that, as you saw that I did here, by clicking on your map page and going to landscape or portrait, depending on what size your site is. The first thing we want to do is to draw our map onto the map canvas, which we do by clicking on this button right here on the side toolbar, which just allows you to add a map. And so if you click this button, it'll give you this tool where you can drag to size the map however you want to. So it doesn't really matter how we size it. You can drag it to whatever size because we're going to change it anyways. So let's say that we just open it up to here. So you can see that the map gets pasted on based on whatever our view is in this map view. So for instance, if we were to scroll our map over to the ocean here, and then went to add the map, you would see that it just adds the ocean view onto the map. So make sure that you have your map canvas centered over where your site is, and then when you go back to your map canvas and add the map, it'll be in the right spot. So what we want to do is just resize that to whatever size you want. Some people like to make the map the full page. That's totally a great choice. Nothing wrong with that. You can add your title block and your scale bars and stuff just onto the edges of the map. What I like to do is I like to leave a little space at the bottom where I add, my title block and my scale bar, and my legend and all that. I think it just gives it a bit more of a clean look, but you can do it however you want to. But for the purpose of this, I'll just leave a bar there at the bottom for us to add stuff to later. Now, the other important really thing about having a map like this is choosing the appropriate scale. So as you can see here, I'll define what a scale is. A scale is basically just how zoomed in we want our map to be. Now you can see here that we're pretty well zoomed out of our map because we've got a lot of area outside of where our site is located that's included, which isn't a bad thing because it can give you more information about where the site is located and what's in the surrounding area, but not to the point where it makes it confusing to look at. So if you look at this map, you can see it's kind of difficult to tell which shovel test is supposed to be which shovel test and which surface artifact is labeled to be which. And that's just because it's zoomed out enough that kind of our information gets a little bit messed up, and it becomes a little bit confusing. So we want to make sure that that's not the case. Now, according to the BC government guidelines for a detailed site map, such as this, we always want to be at a low enough scale to show all the site boundaries and all of our collected field data, surface artifacts, shovel tests, evaluative units, that sort of thing, in as much detail as possible. So this scale can range between 1 to 500 and 1 to 4,000, depending on the size of your map, or rather, depending on the size of your site. So for a larger site, you will need a larger scale to show the entire thing in detail. And for smaller sites, you don't need as big of a scale. So you can see that our current scale, when we click on our map that we've done, is about 1 to 1,000. So if we just round that off at 1,000 exactly, you can see that this is not quite detailed enough to be able to see everything. You know, we have overlapping labels. We have not very much clarity on which label is matched up to which test or which surface artifact. So we want to zoom this in a bit. So you can kind of mess around with it. Let's say we drop this down to 1 to 500. Now you can see it's a little bit clearer, but yeah, actually 1 to 500 is good. If we had tried something like 1 to 250, you can see there's lots of detail. You can very easily tell which waypoint is connected to which label, but we don't get to see the whole site boundary in detail, which is something that's really important. So before, 1 to 500 scale worked perfectly, because basically the total width of the site is essentially matched up to the edges of our map. So you can see that there's only a little bit of area outside the top here, and then down at the bottom there's only a little area outside the bottom, and then also you can see quite detailed what label belongs to which waypoint on our map. And you can see our site photo locations, you can see our evaluative unit location really well, and you can read all the labels clearly, and you can see the site boundary clearly. So this is the scale that we will go forward with for this map. This might change if your map is smaller or bigger. Now, one thing I didn't touch on was actually creating a label for your site datum. This is something you can just add manually if you didn't collect it in the field, but you do have to know what the easting and northing location for the site is. So the datum is just an area, essentially for the purpose of this map, it's just a waypoint that shows you where the site is located. So if someone wants to navigate to it, they can put in these coordinates and find out exactly where the site is if they need to access it. There are other reasons you collect a site datum. For instance, if you're doing evaluative testing so that everything is set to the same standard, that's another whole detailed issue. For the purpose of the map, it's basically just to show the location of where the site is. And you can see here that because we're in the UTM zone 10N that I discussed before, the coordinate reference system, you can see these numbers right here. And these are known as eastings and northings. There are a bunch of different coordinate reference systems that you can use. I'm not going to get into all of those. Like I said, I'm using the Universal Transmarcator system, also known as UTM. Essentially, this is just the easting and northern coordinates inside of the UTM zone we're in, which basically slices the globe into orange slices. And you can see these easting and northern coordinates that are basically just X and Y coordinates, same way that you would plot them on a graph inside of the orange slice on the planet that we're on. So you can find a more detailed video explaining how that works. I know I probably just did a terrible job explaining. For the purpose of this video, all you need to know is that this is how we lay out the label on the map. So long as you have it indicated somewhere, this is just so that someone can navigate to the site if and when they need to. So now that we've got our map set up, our boundary set up, and everything is okay looking on our map canvas, we need to add everything else that a map needs, which includes a north arrow, a title block, legend, and a scale bar. And I'll show you how to add each of those things right now. So the first thing we add is a north arrow. And the good thing about the map editor in QGIS is that it's very easy to add all of these features. So the first thing we're going to do is add the north arrow. So we're going to click on this sidebar toolbar right here and click north arrow, and then you can just click and drag to add it on. There are a bunch of built-in north arrows in QGIS, which are usually the ones that I just use. I like this style personally, but there's a whole bunch of different north arrows that you can add. You can see that there's all sorts of different ways to indicate that. So long as it's indicated, that's all that really matters. And I usually like to put it up in the top corner of the map. So another important part of making your map is going to be the title block. So we're going to do that by adding a label. There's probably other ways to do this, but this is just the way that I prefer to do it. Basically what this is just adding a text box. So we're going to click this little button right here, and we're going to click and drag our text box so that it's open, and we're going to just place it so that it kind of leaves a little bit of space. And we can change the horizontal and vertical margin just for the title so it's not stuck up in the corner. And we're going to click the frame button because that'll just give us a nice frame around where our title block is going to be. So to edit the text in this, you just have to go up to the properties and you can select this and add in whatever you want. So this is going to be the detailed site map. And I usually like to put the main title of the map in bold as well. Now, our title block is going to need more information than just that, obviously, which is why I've left enough space. And so I'm going to add a second text box inside of this one. And this is where we're going to add some additional information. So first thing we want to add is a spot for the site Borden number. Basically, this is just a classification code for to differentiate sites from each other. I can do a whole different video on the Borden system. It's a system that's not used globally, but there's a lot of different places that do use this system for naming sites, including Canada, or rather not Canada, but British Columbia. And so that's what we're going to do. And now, since our site is new and it hasn't been assigned a Borden number yet, we're just going to leave this space blank, but we do like to put it there just so that when the site does get assigned a Borden number, it can just get added into this slot. So we're just going to hit enter to start our new line, and this is where we're going to put our temporary number. So this is whatever, this number is whatever we were referring to the site as before it was assigned a Borden number. There's a lot of different ways that you can do this. This is something that you probably would have figured out in the field. We'll just call this site T1 or T1 for temporary one, although you probably would want to use more detailed site numbers just so you can easily differentiate between them, but we'll just call it T1 for now. The next thing is going to be the permit. Since we did subsurface testing and collected artifacts, and this is not located on a reserve, we would need a Heritage Conservation Act permit to be doing work at the site. In most cases, not always, but in most cases, this is what we would want. So our permit number will be the year the permit was issued, followed by the permit number. So we're just going to say 001. This will be whatever your permit number is. This will, depend on what permit you're working under. So you'll have to change that to whatever you need to. Next thing we do is we add a line for base map, which is basically just telling people what the base map canvas is. Since we didn't create this satellite imagery, we have to give credit and let people know what base map we're using. So in this case, we are using Google Earth. You can see that we're running out of space here, so I'm just going to drop the font size down for this text box, which you can go to by clicking on this box right here and changing the size down to 8, just for the sake of this. The next two lines we have are going to be when the site was last visited, as well as when this map was created. Sorry, I can't type and commentate very well. So the site last visited is just going to be the date that you were last at the site. So let's just say that it was the 1st of May, 2026. Again, this will depend on whatever day you were last at the site. And then the map created, we'll say, was on the 30th of May, 2026, which is not what today is, but I'll just add that for the sake of consistency. So here we have our title block. So you can see that we have our detailed site map title, and then we have all of this information that's going to add a lot of important stuff, and we can also shrink this down a bit if we need to. But that's essentially what we have for the title block. Now, the second to last feature we need for our map is to add a legend. This basically just tells people what symbology on the map indicates. So these little star symbols are surface artifacts, these little squares are shovel tests. This red outline is the boundary, which we know, but someone who's reading the map might not necessarily know all of it, so we need to put down a legend that tells us what everything is. So maybe before I go ahead and do that, I'll show you guys how. So same thing, right below where we were adding the text boxes is going to be the legend icon. And again, the same thing with this that's nice about QGIS is that it will do it mostly automatically. If you select the map and then go to add the legend, you can click it and then drag it. it'll appear, which will show you everything, all of the symbology, along with all of the titles for the symbology. So we have our site datum, site photo, evaluative unit, surface artifacts, and shovel tests. Now, not all of this is super important. Like, we don't need to have this new scratch layer on our map. So what we're going to do is we're going to click this button under legend items and say only show items inside linked maps. So that's just going to get rid of anything that doesn't appear on this map canvas. So that layer that disappeared is no longer going to be on here. And we're also going to click this box that says only show items inside current atlas feature, just to make sure that the legend and the map are linked perfectly. And when you take something off the legend, it will also take it off the map, and vice versa. We don't need legend entries for Google Satellite. It's quite obvious. We also want to deselect auto update, which just means that it won't automatically update. We have to manually refresh it. And it will also allow us to get rid of items on this map, or on this legend. So we don't need a legend entry for a lot of these things. For instance, Google Satellite, since we indicated that in the title block, we don't need to have that in the legend. So you can just click on things in here that you don't need and press the minus button, and then you can see that it disappears from the legend. Now, we don't really need a header for field data. It's not super important, and it just takes up space. So if there's things that you want to hide, you can right-click on them and then hit hidden instead of group, and that will also get rid of it. Now, for the title of our legend, we're just going to add that as legend, so that it's very clear what it is. As you can see here, our legend is way too large to be fitting on this map. So what we want to do is divide it up. So what we're going to do is, let's say that we want to chop it about in half, where it says surface artifact here. We're going to click on surface artifact. You can click on it for this layer and then double click on it. And then you want to start a new column before this item, which just basically gives us a bit more space. Now, another thing we want to do is change the fonts and text formatting, because all of our font is way too big right now. And so we're going to change all of our group fonts and subgroup fonts down to 12, or rather from 12 down to 10, just so everything's a standardized shape and size for font. And then we're also, as you can see, it's still too tall, so there's a few more things we want to do. One thing we can do is make the symbols a bit smaller so that they don't take up as much space. We can do that also for these ones, like if we select this and reduce the size down, then they'll take up less space. We can also rotate this so it looks a bit nicer as well for the site photo. I'll pick this back up once I've got everything set up so that it fits well on our site map. So as you can see, we've now edited our map legend so that it fits perfectly on our little bottom bar here, right next to our title block. And the very last thing we need to do is add a scale. So this is extremely easy. All you need to do is beneath the legend icon on the taskbar on the left-hand side, you hit add scale bar. Same thing we did with the other things. Click it and drag it. And you can change it to whatever size you need it to be. And in this scale bar, you could also add your company logo or any other important information, but it will automatically link the scale to the map. So let's say that we change this 1 to 1000. Again, you can see that our scale has changed to reflect what our map scale is. But let's change it back to 500. So we'll add a frame around that. You can extend it out. You can put lots of information in this box, but or like, you know, logos for your school or company or whoever you're making the site map for. But we'll leave it blank because that's, you know, you're going to add whatever you want to do. And then the other thing we need to do is make sure we add a numerical scale. So you click on the map again, you go to add another scale, which is just going to add another one. But instead of having it be a bar scale, we're going to go up to the corner here and click on style and go numeric. And that will just show us the numeric scale as well, 1 to 500. After that, our map is pretty much done. There's more information that you can add to this to fill it out, but other than that, this is all the most important features for the map, and we can now submit it, rather export it to submit or add into a report. So thank you guys for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one.